An ordinary battalion at war, the 2nd Battalion in the Essex Regiment in the Great War, Episode 6, Action at Gheer. We've previously seen the battalion fighting around the Mediterranean area, and it has been moving north to take part in the Battle of Ypres, the First Battle of Ypres. This is basically an action where the German army are attacking Ypres, they're attacking from east to west, and the British army, supported by elements of the French army, are trying to hold their ground and defend what passes as the high ground surrounding Ypres on the right-hand side, the eastern side. Ypres is about the last major town in Belgium in this area and was to take on a great symbolic effect and was fought over, perhaps not necessarily just for military senses, but also for political and morale purposes. For the 2nd Essex, their activity at this point on October 1914 is centred around the kind of southern flank of this salient, as it came to be called, and they're going to be in the area of Bois de Plugstreet, or Plugstrud, or Plugstreet Wood, as the British soldiers called it, and as I will continue to after my terrible pronunciation of the name. Now, when the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment were brought into the area, they were placed in the area of a chateau, which is in the area of the now Plugstreet 1418 experience, and they were used to defend the chateau and Hill 63, which is in that area, which was being used for artillery. However, the Battle of First Ypres is very much a case of attacks being put into various places, small units being sent off to putty up the line, and battalions and brigades and so on being split up. And much of this action is to take place around this wood and to the southeast or bottom right-hand corner of the wood, in the area of Gheer on the map, or Le Gheer as it was called at the time. Now, the 12th Brigade had been defending this kind of area and were to find themselves under attack by the German 19th Corps, so kind of heavily outnumbered. And the Germans were attacking from the east towards Le Gheer and trying to get through the wood, and the 12th Brigade were joined up with the Cavalry Corps to their north. And it was probably at this sort of junction, whether knowingly or unknowingly, the Germans were attacking. In this action on the 21st of October, elements of the 2nd Essex are going to be involved in defending this village and recapturing it, as it turns out. I'd already mentioned this idea that the puttying up, where small parts of a brigade or even a battalion was sent off, and this is one of the things that happened to the 2nd Essex at this point. Its D company was split, and a couple of parts of the the company, were placed to the east of Le Gheer, 2 platoons. But then a further 2 platoons had spent the night in a junction just north of Le Gheer, and it's marked here on this map as morning of the 21st of October, and this map comes from the regimental history. Now, in the early hours of that morning, about 5:15, the Germans put in another attack, and elements of the 19th Corps advance from east to west on this map. Now, they attacked with the benefit of a morning mist, something that will come up a few times in the wars as this story develops. But they also attacked without artillery support, so that the attack was silent and could surprise the British troops. And it was fairly successful, pushing back elements of the 11th Brigade and the D Company, or 2 platoons, of D Company of the 2nd Essex, were tasked to try and push the Germans back out of Le Gheer, where they had captured that morning. So they are pulled back into the wood, they come out onto the main road, and they advance along this road, and that's Plugstreet Wood that you can see on the left there, and they advance through that wood. And one of the platoons was being led by a platoon sergeant, Sergeant Barton, who in our last episode we're aware was awarded a Distinguished Conduct Medal. And they managed to get themselves into the very, very corner of the wood and engage the Germans with rifle fire. And it would appear Germans were literally sort of laying out in the road, perhaps preparing to organise themselves to attack further to the west. And so they surprised the Germans and broke up that attack. A section of 15 platoon was told to push south of the road and take over some unused artillery emplacements. And Major Moffat was in charge of these platoons, or part of this line, and was with them as they crossed the road into those artillery emplacements. Now, when this happened, when they got into the area of these artillery emplacements, Major Moffat was actually shot in the chest, and took cover, obviously, but he was then stuck where he was. He was pinned down by machine gun fire coming from the Germans in the position of the crossroads at Gheer, which is where this photo is showing us. A sergeant that was with him was also wounded, and so Major Moffat handed over command of his detachment to a Sergeant Moss and told him to send back a report to brigade headquarters by runner to say that they would hold on as best as they could. And this is one of the features of the First World War, is that it was a war where the communications that would be required for that type of fighting just weren't in place. So rather than having the radios that modern day battlefields would be reliant upon, they're actually sending people running back, hence the term runner, to pass messages, and it'd be quite common for these messages to be delayed, lost, not make it all the way through, and so on. So the Major Moffat is wounded and in these artillery positions, which would be just to the right of the image that we're now looking at here, and they find themselves being pressurised by the Germans again. And so Major Moffat tells the sergeant to fall back with the rest of his men and move back to a position further back to the west. Major Moffat, who survives this, has no recollection of this in according to the regimental history as he passed out, but was to regain consciousness later and crawl into one of the British trenches, and was then later picked up by soldiers from another unit, Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers. We've mentioned already this putting up idea about different troops being pushed into different places, but a brigade staff captain, Captain North, had come forward bringing 2 companies of the East Lancashire, 1st Battalion East Lancashires, and he also picks up 15 Platoon and 13 Platoon of the 2nd Essex, and he then takes them into a counter-attack, and they were involved in a charge that actually cleared Gheer of the enemy. They also managed to clear the southern part of the wood, Plugwich Wood, and occupied the village and trenches in the village. The regimental history points out that 13 Platoon, which was being led by Sergeant Barton, was counter-attacked 3 times by the Germans and was driven off on each occasion. And the 9th Lancers were the cavalry unit just to the north of where the Essex were, and Major Abdi of the 9th Lancers reported back to the Brigade General Anley, who had previously commanded the 2nd Essex, that they had behaved magnificently. Now, further to the south of this, just the other side of the junction, we remember there were 2 further platoons of the 2nd Essex who were involved in the fighting. And during this action, Sergeant Pudney was awarded a Distinguished Conduct Medal. Now, Sergeant Pudney was one of 4 brothers serving in the British Army from a town called Halstead in the north of Essex. And these photos are taken from the Essex Chronicle, and they're very bad pictures, so I apologise for that. But basically, it says, on the morning of the 21st of October 1914, 2 platoons from my company were sent to reinforce another regiment. When we were within 30 yards of the trenches, we had a volley fired upon us, and we were retired to another trench. And basically, there's wounded men, and Pudney goes out and recovers the wounded men and brings them back. And he does this on a number of occasions. And whilst when you look in the DCM records, it actually says that he was awarded it for actions at Mutteren. We can see here that when he's interviewed by the local newspaper, he clearly feels that it's for the actions here on the 21st of October that he is awarded this medal. Now, the other 2 platoons that were to the south of the junction, one was being commanded by Lieutenant Vance, and we've met him before in our story as he was wounded in September on the Aisne, but his luck runs out on this occasion. His servant gives the following account of his death. They had just relieved the rifle brigade at Gheer when they were immediately attacked by an enfilade fire from the enemy. Lieutenant Vance, who was in charge of 2 platoons, remember they're just to the south of the junction, directed the men to leave the trenches and then gave the command to charge. His words were, "Come on, men, charge the bounders." Taking the lead, he was shot through the abdomen. The action had a victorious result, and Lieutenant Vance had played hockey and football for his regiment. Now, Lieutenant Vance was killed, Another lieutenant, Second Lieutenant Pierce, was captured, and he did survive the war and was returned as a prisoner of war at the end of the war. And so Sergeant Stevenson and Sergeant Sharpley end up as platoon commanders. Now, Sergeant Sharpley, we've met before. He was leading patrol actions, and he's one of those men that seems to be stepping forward whenever there's hard work to be done. And they were both commended by an officer of the 1st Kings, a battalion that they were assisting, about the hard work that they'd been putting in. So the cost of this action, which was successful, according to the regimental history and other records, it says that one officer was killed, which we know is Lieutenant Vance. One officer was wounded, which we believe is Major Moffat. One officer was missing, which we think is 2nd Lieutenant Pierce. And my research would suggest that there was 28 other ranks killed in action on this day. Now, a few of them are buried in local cemeteries, but many of them are commemorated on the Plug Street Memorial, which is pretty much next to the site of the chateau, which is where the 2nd Essex had started their adventures around Plug Street Wood, when they'd been sent to defend that as a position, and Hill 63, which we can see is just the slight rising ground in the back of this image. Now, Plug Street Wood was to become quite famous throughout the war. It was often used as a bit of a training area for troops at a later date, and one young officer, well, not necessarily that young, one officer who was to find his feet as an officer on the Western Front at a later date was Winston Churchill, when he spent a period with both the 2nd Grenadier Guards, learning his way, and as a battalion commander of the 6th Royal Scottish Fusiliers. He served in the Plug Street area as well. Now, the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment are going to stay around the Plug Street and Armitaires area for quite some time, and this is going to take them up till Christmas, where they're one of the first battalions to be involved in a Christmas truce. So that will be in the next episode, and if you're interested in that, don't forget to subscribe. You know how YouTube works. It'd be good to get some feedback on that, and it is giving me encouragement to see that people are watching and commenting on the videos. So next time we'll pick up the 2nd Essex as they head towards the first winter of the war, the Christmas that they thought it would all be over by.